Robot Talk is the podcast that sits down with robot enthusiasts from around the world and asks them the questions you always wanted answered. Like, is that a robot or a plant? And how does that thing work? Hello everyone! Welcome to Robot Talk. I'm your host, Claire Asher, and this week's episode is exploring an exciting new area of research that is taking inspiration from plants to create robots that are soft, adaptable, and biodegradable. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you that you can send in questions for my future guests. And there are a few different ways you can do that. You can submit questions on the website at robottalk.org or on Patreon at patreon.com/Claire Asher. Or you can contact me on social media at robottalkpod. So, with all that said, let's get on with this week's interview. I recently had a really interesting conversation with Isabella Fiorello from the University of Freiburg about plant-inspired robots made from living materials. This week, I'm chatting to Isabella Fiorello, a researcher at the University of Freiburg, working on biologically inspired hybrid materials. Hi Isabella, welcome to Robot Talk.
Hi Claire.
So you lead the Bioinspired Plant-hybrid Materials group, where you're developing new materials for applications in soft robotics, precision agriculture, and space exploration. So, first of all, can you explain what a plant hybrid material is?
So thank you so much for the question. Actually, I start my group here just recently in Freiburg, where my group is working on these materials that are not only bio-inspired, but also biohybrid. In the sense that this material not only take inspiration from living organisms, especially plants in my case, but also embed the parts of the plants itself in the materials. For example, I create some materials that have actuation properties thanks to the parts of the plants embedded in the material. Or for example, these materials can have sensing properties respect to the parts that you embed in the material itself. So actually, we can create materials that have the morphology, let's say, the biomechanics of plants, and also can be like functionalized to do some specific task. Like, for example, moving over the soil, like in my last paper, or for example, like sense some parameters and so on.
Amazing. I mean, it's, truly quite sci-fi. I love it.
Thank you so much.
How do you go about embedding parts of a plant into, I guess, a synthetic material?
Yeah, actually, in my last paper, the one published in Advanced Material, I create these biohybrid robots, which was inspired by Avena sterilis, which is the common wild oat. Maybe you know it. It's very common. You can find everywhere in the field in many different habitats. And so my idea was to create artificially the head, the capsule of the robots. And this I did using different micro-manufacturing technique. But then I removed some parts from the natural fruits of the plants. These parts are called owns. And there are some parts that, thanks to humidity, can move in different environments. So what I did was really to embed these parts in the synthetic materials. And so then, thanks to these parts, the robots can move on and into the soils because the owns of the natural plants itself can do it. So actually the idea was to mimic really the behavior of the plants, but also the morphology and the mechanics of the plants, and then functionalize the head of the robots with, for example, in our case, with some other seeds for reforestation applications.
Okay, so it buries itself in the soil, right?
Yes, exactly. You have these robots that can move autonomously, so don't need any energy because the energy is embedded in the material itself. and can be functionalized, like I say, with other seeds, for example, or fertilizer and so on. And then can move inside, for example, the soil cracks or irregularities. So the robots find autonomously these cracks, and then it go inside that, and it start to degrade to be used to deliver something, like, for example, fertilizer, as I say, or others.
That's amazing. So yeah, completely biodegradable, automatic planting or fertilizing of the soil.
Yes, exactly. It's fully biodegradable. I would say it's also edible, so it not affect the biodiversity, let's say, because it's made by a floor material. The capsule is totally biodegradable and edible, and the owns are taken from the natural plants.
Yeah.
So actually you don't have any dangerous or toxic materials in the environment.
That's really cool. So where do you get your inspiration from? Do you start with the problem, or do you start from like observing the natural world and going, oh, this is a really cool property, what can I do with that?
Yes.
Or a bit of both, maybe.
The idea at the beginning was to create a new actuator inspired by these plants. But then after looking at the plants, which is this plant I told you, Avena sterilis, which has two interactive sister owns that actually interact each other, they rotate, interact, and then accumulate elastic energy. And then the robots release the energy, and the robots can also move by jumping over the soil. So this is the moment. So what I would really do is to, let me say, really create a biohybrid system, because this was the first hybrid system inspired also by wild wild fruits, and also the first system that really embed parts of the plant itself. And these are dead tissue of the plants. So it's not a living tissue. It's not like you are removing, I don't know, for example, a leaf or something, and then the leaf will, of course, die, because it has no nutrients and so on. But in this case, because it's a dead tissue, also if you remove from the plants, it's remain with the properties, with the proper functionalities. And so I can use it as actuator for the robots. And the inspiration I have just really looking at the fruits. And at the beginning, I was thinking to do these actuators, but then really was too difficult to mimic. And so I decided to also embed the part of the plant itself, and plus was working. So
yeah, fantastic.
I decided to continue with this.
Yeah, I think I've spoken to a lot of people who do like bio-inspired robotics, but usually they are trying to, copy a mechanism rather than actually embed the once living material into the robot itself.
Yeah, exactly. That's also the novelty, of this work that we publish in Advanced Material.
Yeah. I think maybe a lot of listeners might not actually be aware, like there's an awful lot of plants that have different structures that kind of change in response to different conditions. Like I'm aware of like pine cones, which open up to release their seeds, and these structures that sort of essentially sense the environment and then respond in some way are quite amazing.
Yeah, actually what you say, it's perfectly correct, because, for example, also the pine cones can be used for a similar applications. Actually, here in Freiburg, there are a lot of people also working on this pine cones mechanism, and it could be also cool to do a robot that embed this part. I mean, because the field is so new, there are also so many applications that can be done in this direction. So also in my group, we are working more on bioinspired, of course, but also biohybrid system. And for biohybrid, I really mean in this moment to embed dead tissue of plants, for example. Or also in the last period, I'm working on some materials which are inspired by plants, but that, for example, also embed some microalgae inside.
Okay.
This I did during my stay at the California Institute of Technology for 5 months. And in this case, this material can also, for example, self-heal. So like some self-healing properties, but as like the shape and the morphology of the natural plants.
That's really cool. Yeah, I haven't come across anyone else who's really working in this area. Is it really kind of really new?
Yeah, it's a really new area. There are very few people in the world that, on this biohybrid, I think really it's really a new field. But there are some groups that work on plant-inspired structures. Of course, my past supervisor, Barbara Mazzolai, she's the pioneer of this plant-inspired robotics, because in her lab, they create, for example, the first robots inspired by the plant roots that can also grow inside the soil and be used to monitor different parameters. And and now there are also other groups in the world that start working on this.
Yeah, I think most of the bio-inspired robots I've seen before are usually inspired by animals.
Yes, exactly.
People don't give plants enough credit for like being really smart and adaptable and responding and moving and doing all kinds of things that we don't kind of traditionally think of plants as doing.
Yeah, that's true, actually. There are a lot of groups that work on animals. For example, there are robots inspired by the gecko-fit or by the bees, by the octopus, and so on. But there are very few groups working on plants. But I will say in the last period, there were also a lot of materials, especially materials, not really robots. Sometimes it's just a material that is inspired by the microstructures, especially of plants, or the internal structure of the plants, especially because plants are really important for the biomechanical properties, because they can't move like animals, so they can't escape the environments in which they grow. So they have to adapt to the environments, and to do it, they develop different biomechanical and morphological properties that can be really interesting for different applications in robotics, in architecture, in space exploration. There are many different applications.
One project of yours that caught my eye was a tiny climbing robot that's inspired by the hooked leaves of plants. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, sure. Actually, this was my PhD project.
Okay.
And to do it, I took inspiration from plants, which is called Gallium aparine. And these plants have some small micro hooks over the leaf. So what I did was to take inspiration from the morphology and biomechanics of these micro hooks to create materials, micro-patterned materials, which has the same shape of the micro hooks of gallium aparine. And so I created these adhesive that were used for reversible attachment to many different surfaces. Like, for example, I tested to textile tissue or skin tissue, or also to leaf tissue. Okay. I actually have also early career National Geographic grant on this topic, especially the micro hooks on the leaf attachment. And what we did in my past group was to embed also these micro hooks with sensors to create a multi-parameter sensor that can attach over the upper and lower side of the leaf to monitor remotely different parameters. Or we did these tiny climbing robots. Actually, we created this sort of mini car where we attach the micro hooks, and the robots with the micro hooks was able to climb a different surface, while the robots without was not able to do it. So that was very funny. Then I did also some other work connected to that.
That's really cool. Yeah. So it's kind of the plant version of Velcro.
It's a sort of Velcro, but there is one main difference with Velcro, because with Velcro, you have, first of all, a micro hook that has a different shape. And this shape, when you have a loop part and a hook part, you need a force to detach the two parts.
Yeah.
Instead, in my specific case, I have, let me say, a micro hook that is direction-based. So actually, you can just remove the micro hook, just changing the direction of the applied load. So this is very useful, for example, for application like climbing robots, or for example, for manipulation applications. And also another big difference is that our micro hooks can be used not only to textiles, but also over leaf surface, for example. And especially in the leaf surface, I forgot to say that the microhooks can not only attach, but can also be used to deliver molecules inside the plant vascular tissue.
Right.
And actually, we have also a patent on this technology because it was the first technology that can really attach, sense, and also deliver molecules inside the plant vascular tissue.
Yeah. It sounds like there's probably an awful lot of applications for that, but did you have any specific ones in mind?
Yeah, actually, I would love that in the future, this technology can be used for, of course, precision agriculture. So especially you can think to use this kind of device, for example, to treat some disease in plants. For example, there is Xylella fastidiosa that is a very dangerous disease for plants. And this is inside the phloem and the xylem of the plants. And with the microhooks, you can directly access the xylem and the phloem of the plants. And you could directly derive, for example, some bactericides inside them to fight with this kind of disease instead of spraying the pesticides over the cuticle of the.
So for listeners who aren't familiar, the xylem and phloem is kind of like the circulatory system of a plant, for lack of a better way of explaining it.
Yeah.
So you're kind of injecting a medicine into the plant, essentially.
Yes, exactly. It's a sort of, let's say, microneedle device. There are these devices used especially for skin tissue. But in our case, we are developing a microhooks device that is instead to treat plants.
Yeah.
So you can think to use this technology for something like this. Or, for example, also for research purpose, if you need a tool to deliver something in a precise way inside the leaf surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just love the idea of like a little robot wandering around the field and then like finding a plant that's infected and kind of climbing up and injecting it with some medicine.
Yeah.
That would be really cool.
Yeah. At the moment, we are a bit far from this, but I mean, we have some, let's say, preliminary encouraging publications.
Sure. Yeah. I do tend to get ahead of myself with imagining where this stuff could go. We've talked quite a lot about applications in precision agriculture. You also mentioned space exploration. How do you see plant hybrid materials or bio-inspired materials being used in that kind of domain?
Yeah, that's a very nice question. Actually, I really love space applications. It's one of my main passion, let's say. And I would love to apply the technology that I developed, the one of the avena seeds. I mean, the biohybrid robots that can move on and into the soil. Also in space simulants, like, for example, Mars simulants, or, for example, also lunar simulants, because you can, for example, use this kind of robots to increase the fertility of the soil in space.
Right.
Like, imagine you have this device that is autonomously moving over, of course, at the beginning will be a reconstructed space environment.
Yeah.
But you can release these robots, and these robots can move and plant itself in the soil. And you know that we have a big problem of, we can't plant anything in the soil in space at the moment. So this can be a first tool, biohybrid tool inspired by plants that can be used to plant plants in space.
Yeah, like part of a kind of terraforming project, I guess.
Yes, something like this. Yes. Like for a sort of reforestation in a space scenario.
Yeah. When I hear about ideas about how we might colonize another planet, obviously the common theme is that we send robots to kind of get things set up for us first.
Yeah.
But yeah, they rarely talk about robots being able to plant forests for us, so that would be cool.
Yeah.
But is there soil on like Mars or the moon? Isn't it just like dusty?
Yeah. I mean, there actually I have now because I bought from a startup. So it's possible to buy this Mars soil simulants. So
cool.
And I plan to test it in the future. Yeah. I hope also to get some big grants on this so that I will have some people working on space projects.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Are there any other projects you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, The last period, I'm working more on aquatic plants, so not only terrestrial plants.
Okay.
And so I hope in the near future to have a publication on this, because we are in the last phase at the moment. And also my PhD student, she just started 8 months ago, and we are working on also on aquatic robots. So stay tuned because
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a really novel, fascinating area of research, and I can see there being like just so many different areas you could apply this to. So yeah. I'm very excited to hear about what you get up to in the future.
Thank you so much.
Isabella, it's been really fun talking to you today. I've been speaking to Isabella Fiorello from the University of Freiburg. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy Robot Talk, please share the podcast, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps boost the podcast, so thanks in advance. And make sure you check out @Robot Talk Pod on social media to see a photo of the miniature biohybrid robot that can bury itself in the soil, which Isabella and I talked about. I thought you might like to hear a sneak peek of this month's bonus episode. What is one thing about your field that you wish more people knew?
I think I would like people to know that robots are not only very complex, robust, and impressive systems, but they are also a bit dumb. they're a bit dummies in a way, because they require a lot of work to make them work. You know, you have to know exactly how to wrangle them to make them work. So I think that'd be a nice thing to communicate to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think people assume because they see that the robot is kind of autonomous and is doing some things on its own, they kind of assume that it is like, you know, a cat or a dog and kind of can just look after itself and will just be fine and functional without any kind of input.
Yeah.
Scale drone operations is technically crazy hard. We do more engineering that most people would never assume we do. It boggles people's minds when they see it.
If you'd like to hear more from this bonus episode, sign up as a supporter on Patreon by going to patreon.com/Claire Asher, and you'll get access to the full catalogue of bonus content. Next week, I'm talking to Keenan Wyrabek from Zipline about delivering medicine by drone. Until then, I've been Claire Asher, and this has been Robot Talk. Robot Talk is brought to you by the Hamlin Centre, Imperial College London.